So first of all, thanks for having me. Delighted to be here despite the weather that's happening outside. There's a bit of me going, summer is officially over as the rain drips down the panel. So my name is Suzy Levy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and a bit about why I wrote the book before we talk about some of the concepts inside. You can probably hear from my accent, I'm not from around here, although I've lived in London for 20 years. And I found this thing called diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity. Back then in the 90s when I started working, it was just called diversity. I found it hard. And actually I found it quite off-putting. So I joined a big management consultancy in the late 90s, and the conversations and rooms I was being invited to were all about babies and nannies and how I was going to have to navigate my career. Now, I had grown up on a farm with no running water, no electricity. I was dirt poor. I owed almost $100,000 in student loans. I was working 70 hours a week. And I remember thinking, I've got boobs, but that is really all that aligns me between the woman who at the event I was at was standing there in a cashmere coat telling me how I was going to have to navigate my career. And I found this one particular event so bad, I walked out and I didn't come back into a room titled Diversity for a decade. And when I did, it was because I'd been asked to lead it. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this. I really don't want to lead this thing called diversity. And the boss I had at the time said, I really want you to lead it. You're very thoughtful in what you're doing, and I reckon you can crack open, some of what we need to do. And shortly after I accepted the role, my world changed. I'm going to tell you about that first lesson in a second, because it made me realize how much I didn't know about life, about humanity, and as well about inclusion. Now, I wrote this book because I think we have a lot of work to do. And I wrote it because there's a lot of people out there who give a damn, but they're doing a lot of guesswork in terms of trying to figure out what can I do as an individual to change the world and the environment that we sit in. It has two parts. The first is why change isn't happening. 5 chapters dedicated to our frustration with history, racial history, sexual orientation history, why gender norms have a strong hold on our society for men, for women, for transgender individuals. Why when we look at it in our lane and we talk only about women or only about being gay or only about being black or Asian or any of those things, there's a huge problem. And it's not to say we're not beginning to understand intersectionality, but I think we're only just beginning to understand connectedness. Some of these problems we face are fundamentally hooked to each other, and when we try and fix them in isolation, we have real problems with the solutions we have. Anyway, I even go on to talk about the infighting between diverse groups, and why we're getting so much pushback on the agenda. The second half of the book is all about how we fix it and what you can do, and I hope if you decide that you want to go on this journey with me, you find it valuable. I wrote it to help others, not for any other reason. But let me tell you about the first lesson, and some of these lessons are in the book, and they're pretty profound for me, and I hope you'll find the same. So the first lesson for me happened on a day when my LGBT network came to me after I'd become the executive sponsor for inclusion and said, we want to run an out gay leadership program, Suzy. And I said, no, I'm not running a program for gay leaders. I'm not running a program for female leaders. I'm not running a program for black leaders. We're just going to have a leadership program. I also owned leadership, culture, and a few other things. And about a week later, they came back and told me they had it for half price. And I am a sucker for a deal. So all of my really good reasons for not doing it flew out the window. And I said, yes. And they said, we'd like you to be in the room because we think you have some growing to do. So this would be back in the early 2000s. And those 2 days, which I sat in the room and listened and participated with gay, lesbian, and bisexual colleagues, there weren't any transgender colleagues in the room at the time, changed my world. Because I had somehow thought out was this moment you told your mom and dad. That out was the day that you were forever more you. That you were able to be yourself, and it was sort of a moment in time, and it was done when it was done. Out is not one moment in time, it's every moment in the future. It's every choice you make to be yourself. Every situation where you decide the client is not going to bail on the business just because they have a little bit of homophobia. That you decide it's safe to hold your partner's hand. That you decide when somebody asks you what you got up to on the weekend that you share what you did, their pronoun, their name, and maybe even where you went. Because we live in a heterosexual world. And we live in a world where it's illegal to be gay in 69 countries, and it's punishable by death in 10, and it's enforced in 7 of those 10. We are one of the most progressive societies in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, and yet things aren't moving in a straight line here, if you haven't noticed. We've got work to do, and my life as a heterosexual individual has had many barriers. But one of the privileges that I have owned and maybe not known is I've never worried about my safety when holding the hand of my partner. I've never consciously thought about going on holiday. I have as a woman, to be fair, about where I would be comfortable and where I would want to celebrate. And the thing is, if you begin to understand that out is not one moment in time, you start to realize, what can I do for that future moment? What's my job? What does an ally do to signal, to change, to make it easier? When I learned this, I'd staffed more than 30 teams. I thought I was the most inclusive, nice person. I'd never lifted a finger to make it easier. And I didn't know how to, by the way. It took me a long time to figure out how you signal without going, hey, do you want to be my gay friend? Which is a bit uncomfortable, but you can go for it. So out is not one moment in time was my first lesson. My second one is related to the LGBT community, but it's much, much broader. Everybody's editing. If we look at editing from a gay lens, editing is choosing whether or not you are safe. As my friend Rob says, it's the list I have of the people I've told and the people I haven't told, and the decision of when to tell them and what's appropriate. Because even if you're an out gay man living in London in one of the most progressive, gay-friendly societies in the world, you're still not leading with it. It would be a bit like me going, hi, I'm divorced Suzy, nice to meet you. And everyone would be like, okay, that's too much information. Hi, I'm gay Rob is not how you lead the conversation. So when do you tell? How do you tell? And then how do you manage when people who know and who don't know are meeting in the same room? Because sometimes you can wait too long, and then it's harder. I did an interview for the book of somebody I've known for a very long time, who speaks really eloquently about guardian reader guilt. And he said to me, see, I've been around this outing thing and this editing thing for, 40 years. He's an older gay man. And he said, but I was headed home from the Christmas party last year. He's moved to Toronto recently. And it's an hour and 10 minutes, and there's no train. And I had been drinking, so of course I needed a taxi. And the taxi driver asked me about my wife 5 times. Over the course of an hour at 1 o'clock in the morning, and a conversation I didn't really want to hold. But by the 3rd time I was thinking, am I being inauthentic? Am I not willing to own this? Am I maybe putting some bias on him because I'm making assumptions, because we might be of a different skin color, we might come from possibly even a different socioeconomic bracket. So he said by the 5th time he decided to say, my husband. And the taxi driver said, your wife, and kept going. And then said, your wife again, and he said, no, my husband. And they rode for 22 more minutes in silence. Editing is a choice because we know that when we are our whole self, or we're authentically ourselves, it's not always welcomed. So gay people edit, women edit. I'm gonna pause for a second. Any women in the room want to talk about the editing you've had to do to get on in a man's world? Not talking about being on your period, or hiding it, or the number of times I've had to quietly have a word with a girlfriend. I love your bathrooms, by the way, at Macquarie. You have feminine products in the bathroom. Why wasn't that there my whole growing up? I had an incident. Dell Computers was my client for a number of years. A bleed incident at one point at a very important dinner, and I can remember spending 15 minutes in the bathroom trying to wash my skirt out. Has anyone been there? And then trying to go back and pretend, why had I been gone for 15 minutes in the bathroom? What else? How else do women edit?
Yeah, spoken over, not feeling like you can say, you just interrupt people.
Yeah.
Stay very quiet during meetings.
Yeah, so you hold back your voice because sometimes when you challenge people, it's not welcomed, or when you say something, you're talked over. What else?
Pretend your pregnancies are surprises.
Pretend your pregnancy wasn't planned. Whoops. Yes. Anything else that women are doing in order to get on in a man's world?
Also, taxi drivers pretending to have a husband
Yeah.
and not be so drunk because that would be
Inappropriate. Because women shouldn't drink and have fun, right? So there's a whole set of things we do. I mean, to be honest, let's talk about editing for safety. We do all sorts of editing for safety. We edit what we wear, where we walk, whether we hold our keys, how much we drink. There's a whole series of things we do because statistically speaking, we're way more likely to have sexual harm come our way. So women are editing. The world doesn't always like it when we edit. We adopt masculine behaviors, and then sometimes we're called bossy or assertive or those sorts of things. But do men edit too? Because I think they do. What type of editing do men need to do? For any of the men in the room, if you'd like to give it a go.
In a conversation, you might try and maybe overemphasize how much you know about a certain sport.
Yes, oh gosh, to be sporty and male, to love football and be male. I had a client who said to me, you're the first person who, and this is back when you used to get to entertain clients, so this is like 20 years ago. You're the first person who ever invited me to the opera, and I can't wait to go because I hate rugby. But I haven't really said I actually don't want to go to a sporting event, right? So loving sports, and actually you're going to talk about something a little bit later on, talking about grief. My dad died a year and a half ago in January, and I was there for a 20-day period back in the US helping my brother. We did 24-hour care, the two of us. And I came back a little bit traumatized, because you do, it can be, and especially when you are the sole carers. And I told a few friends. It was kind of how I got through it. I was very open about it. And about 40 days ago, a good friend, we're friends with the husband and wife, his dad died unexpectedly of a heart attack. And we were messaging back and forth over WhatsApp, and was like, I hope you're okay, thinking about you, this is, da-da. And when the funeral was over, he said, can I come see you? And my husband said, why is he coming to see you? He had this moment, and he got there in our kitchen. This is maybe 3 weeks ago. It was this summer. He said, you're the first person who's ever talked to me about death, and I need to talk about it, and nobody in my friend set's ready. Can we go for a walk? This is a 47-year-old man who works in this city who just needed someone because his guy friends weren't quite ready to have that conversation, and I'd accidentally, purposely opened it. So we're all editing. How about ethnic minorities, individuals of color editing in a white-centered world? I hear an somewhere. All sorts, everything from accent to home culture to how your hair looks and whether it's all perfectly coiffed and Western-like. There are any number of things that individuals are having to do. We are all editing. But the some more than others, I think, is really important. If you're trying to create a culture of inclusion, you have to know that editing exists. And you have to know that whilst it's helpful to get on, the reason we edit is because we live in a world where we like people with similar things to come together. If you look at Margaret Thatcher for a second, if we raise her up, did she behave extremely feminine, would you say? She outmanned the men. There is a very known phenomenon. You can't ask people who are different, people who are diverse, to come authentically themselves. It doesn't work that way. You can't get there and be different if you're the first one, or even the second one, or maybe even the third one. It takes a long time to be able to show up in the room and bring your difference with you and have it be valued. And that is by creating a culture of inclusion. Now this slide was supposed to build, so I've given you the answer already. Why is editing so important? And why is there a problem when we do it too much? Because if you've been coached to get on this world, I suspect you've been coached on a number of things, that you need to work your butt off. Hard work is absolutely required, and doing a good job is absolutely required. But I hope you also got some coaching around how to get on and the relationships to build. I mean, Vanessa's about to give us a moment to build some relationships, because our world runs on really good work and the people you know. So what happens to a trusted relationship when one person is having to edit a whole heck of a lot? Can it be trusted if you're showing up inauthentically? If you're showing up having to cover or edit a lot of yourself out? It's pretty hard, actually. It's really hard to have a trusted relationship when one person is having to show up, changing themselves. And if we don't understand this, we don't understand the importance and let alone the time and the energy that it takes to edit, to cover, to change. So the trusted relationships element, I think, is really important. You've got one person coming to the party, likely the person who's in the minority group, who's doing a high volume of editing, and you've got things called like minimizing contact happening for the others. So minimizing contact is something I heard in Binna Kandola's book called Racism at Work. And it suggests that if you live in a world that's very diverse, and we do, by goodness, it's amazingly diverse, and you live in a city that's very diverse, or you live in you have a workplace that's very diverse, but by the time you get to your dinner table, the people around it look a lot like you. That's minimizing contact. Your most trusted, your most vulnerable space is your dinner table. And if you're not breaking bread with people of difference to you, it's pretty hard to be able to behave in the way that you need to in a workplace. So I encourage you, whether you're the one who might have to do most of the editing, to do maybe a little less if you could, or those of us in the position of power to recognize that the editing's happening, but also to expand who you break bread with, to change your perceptions, your norms, all sorts of things. This relationship thing is at the heart of systemic isms, which we'll get to in a second. I hear this a lot. Oh my God, I heard this on Tuesday over and over again. A CEO tried to challenge me on this one. But I don't see color. What's wrong with I don't see color? We'll talk about it in racial terms first. Well, first of all, you're denying it exists. And you can see, unless, of course, you're colorblind and you have a slightly different visual view of the room, you can see it. First of all, you can see it. What else are you denying besides its existence?
That it needs to be done.
Yeah, because you're kind of trying to say we're all the same, we're all the same, we're all the same. Are we all the same? And are we all experiencing the world in the same way? No. And by the way, can you see racism if you can't see color? I don't think you can. Similarly, when a guy says to me, I don't see you as a woman, I'm like, well, I got boobs. And you don't have them? I don't think so, right? Like, but it's not about not seeing that I'm a woman or not seeing I have a disability. And a woman I'm on a board with who's in a wheelchair, I interviewed her for the book. And she was like, I don't need you to define me by my wheelchair. But FFFFFS, I need you to see the 3 steps to the bathroom because I can't go pee. It's that simple. I can't go to an event here or there or anywhere with 3 steps and go pee without your help. That's not defining me. That's behaving in an inclusive way and understanding that that adjustment is required. Otherwise, you're going to be carrying me into the lavatory, which is pretty embarrassing for you and pretty embarrassing for me, or I'll be leaving early. So the I don't see color strategy, I think, generally comes from a well-meaning place. It could be an ignorant one, but let's say it's a well-meaning one, and we deploy it all over the place. I don't see your. We need to see these things, and we need to see the joy, the beauty, the brilliance, and the challenge that comes with them. Yeah, I think you eloquently talked about this. I'm just going to glance on it for a second. Men are roughly 2.5 times more likely around the world to take their own life. Men make up 95% of the prison population in the UK, 92% in the US, and 93% of the global prison population, of the incarcerated. In every known addiction, whether we're talking drugs, sex, porn, gambling, men are between 2 and 17 times as likely to be addicted to the thing. I could keep going if you want me to. The world we've created for men isn't all right. Now, men are rising to the top. They are. But there's a consequence, and it's related to our ability to let women rise to the top too. We need more men who can see the hierarchy that's don't be a man, don't be a fag, don't be a girl, man up, grow some balls. These are horrible things, and I apologize for the profanities, but they're things that get said on playgrounds. And they last all the way to our adult years. That hierarchy plays out in a boardroom. Man up. I have heard that term in conference rooms my entire career. Never told to me, by the way. Always told to the man beside me that they needed to man up. This is a problem. We need more women who are allowed to be feminine, and we need to not see femininity as weak. These things are related. There's a reason why more than 80% of primary school teachers in this country are women, but head teachers, 80% men. It's okay to teach if you're a leader in teaching, but not to teach. It's okay to be a doctor, but not a nurse. We need to allow men into roles that are support roles, that are the right roles for them. And it will change the world for women in return. By the way, we need men who love laundry. Equal laundry as much as equality, boys. We all have fears. The number one fear, I run a lot of workshops, I sit at government boards, I get a lot of chances to be in powerful rooms, helping shape our future. And I meet so many people who are afraid. So many, whether they're afraid to say the wrong thing about race, or afraid to say the wrong thing about disability, or afraid to say the wrong thing to a woman. And I think it's really important we put ourselves in the shoes of the other person for a moment. So guys in the room, thank you for being here. You're amazing. Bring more of your friends next time. What do you think the number one fear of a woman is? It's not that you're going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to give you a hint. Women have lots of fears. Fears around equal pay, fears around that sexual harassment or sexual assault thing we talked about. All sorts of fears. I've never met a woman whose fear was that men were going to say the wrong thing. Fear that maybe things weren't going to change, by the way. Similarly, for all the white people in the room, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a person of color for a moment. Do you think the fear is that you're going to say the wrong thing about race? Or that we're going to live in a world where white rises in just about every measure, where the color of your skin is related to your life chances, and we can prove it statistically speaking? Because that's the kind of fear I see. That's the fear I hear. And to get over fear, we have to recognize that it's a valid thing, but it requires us to put it aside for a moment and be there for the bigger goal. You're going to get it wrong. I'm going to put it out there. I've gotten it wrong so many times. Read the book. You might even laugh. I have gotten it wrong so many times. You can't be a white lady talking about race and not get it wrong. You can't be in so many of these rooms helping change things and not get it wrong. But more often than not, it comes with a gentle nudge and a kindness of heart and a desire to help me do better with the power I wield, not in some sort of cancellation. Systemic isms, and these are my last three and all, and then I'm ready to hand over to Vanessa. Systemic isms aren't found in rude words. They're much more subtle than that. This is one of the most profound lessons I learned, and I'm going to share something that's quite embarrassing with you, and I still, to this day, I did it in 2012, and I'm still ashamed of it. My Black colleague network came to me with a 10-page document of experiences of systemic racism at our company. And I said, "Are you sure this is racism?" So first of all, more than a dozen colleagues had given input into the document. If we take race out for a second and just look at what I said, my lived experience or my situational judgment as a human being who is not in the room is better than your all situational judgment. How ridiculous is that? Just for a second, like, oh man. So I said, you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about, and I wasn't even there. In my defense, I didn't want to see it because I didn't want to believe it. And I didn't have the skills. I was new into this thing called inclusion and diversity to see it. And I've since learned you got to stop looking for the really brutal stuff. It exists, by the way, and we should root it out, like immediately. The subtle stuff comes from the dip. So imagine this. Imagine you like me. We have high affinity. I'm awesome, aren't I? and you're giving me a performance review. I've made a mistake, and how are you going to coach me on the mistake I've made? You like me a lot. We have really high affinity, just so you know. What's the kind of coaching I get? Just imagine, we're in a coaching session. What are you going to say to me? Don't worry. It wasn't that bad. This is a growth moment. We were talking earlier about growth mindset. You need a growth mindset. We'll work together to fix this. It will be collaborative, positive, and future-looking if you really, really like me. Now imagine you like me a little less. You don't hate me. Just a little less, little dip in your affinity and our relationship. How would you coach me now when I made a mistake? How are you going to make sure this doesn't happen again? You don't throw me away, right? But you put the ownership on me. We're no longer in collaboration to fix this. It's no longer forward-looking. And now I'm on your watch list. Should I make that mistake again? That dip in affinity happens all the time, and it happens in moments of opportunity, and this is a great example of it. When you layer that, you end up with systemic racism, systemic homophobia, systemic sexism in these moments of opportunity. That's where the numbers, where you make or break inclusion and diverse outcomes. The absence of positivity or the dip of it, rather than something brutal. Which brings me to my final 3. Being nice is not the same thing as being inclusive. I relied on my niceness for a really long time, and I think it put me down the wrong path, quite frankly. I'm not suggesting go be rude. That is not what I want you to take away from this, but I think they're fundamentally different. The world has increased in its expectation that you know how to be an inclusive human being, that you know what equity even is, let alone how to design it and build it into your processes and programs and your ways of working as a team manager, collaborator, or colleague. Inclusion is a verb. It's a doing thing. And if you don't have an understanding about how the world is being experienced from people who are different than you cannot be inclusive. It requires a certain level of knowledge, a level of empathy, and fundamentally action. This is a spectrum I built for a client. They're on bookmarks over there if you want one, about the role we all play. And there are 2 ends of my spectrum. The red share something in common that the middle does not share with the reds. And by the way, I don't meet too many people who want to be at the bottom, or at least espouse they want to be at the bottom. And I don't meet too many people who want to be at the top either. Activism is a dirty word. I once had a client say to me, Suzy, I believe men and women are equal, but I'm no feminist. And I was like, do you know what the definition of feminism is? That you believe all men and women are equal? So what does the middle not share with the ends? Passion? Yeah, there's an element of passion. Yeah, action. So you're right about passion. There's a definite passion at both ends. But the activity going on is huge. And I meet a lot of people who aspire to be an ally. We talked about allyship earlier, and I will leave you with this last lesson. There is no such thing as a passive ally. I don't care how much you hope, want, desire. If you're not willing to take that energy, that action, the go get the knowledge, go learn, go be part of sessions like this, you won't know what action to take. And if you're not taking that action, you're in one of the other roles. Thank you very much for the time, Vanessa. I hope you found that useful.